The spirituals.
Time to get weird. This week's episode of The Stroke of Midnight. How Radiohead changed everything. But before we talk about one of the greatest bands of all time, this past week, Dorian and myself, separately, I'm still in Atlanta, Dorian is in Chicago, went to see the new audiovisual project by Tom York and Mark Pritchard. And fudge, where did that note go with the art, with the visual? Do you remember the visual artist's name?
Jonathan Zawada, I want to say.
That's it. Thank you, Dorian. Okay, well, that nifty trifecta released a theatrical presentation of the album with a visual accompaniment. I saw 20 minutes of it and walked out of the theater. And I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why.
Please do. I am so curious.
I refuse to let an indie theater's shitty fucking sound system ruin my first pass at a Tom York record, especially one of such sonic grandeur as Tall Tales is.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to walk out 5 minutes into the start of this thing, and I was like, let me give them 15 minutes and see if maybe they fix this.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't, so I left.
Gotcha.
Disappointed as I was, I made the right choice, because when I went and actually listened to the album in the car and I drove around in circles for an hour, it was one of the coolest things I'd heard in a long time.
Hell yeah.
Okay. I'm a huge fan of this record.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge fan of pretty much everything Tom York and co does. But so before we dive into like kind of like the whole Radiohead story and what they mean both artistically and just like in the world of like the music industry as a whole, why don't you tell me what you thought of this whole experiment?
Okay. Yeah. I saw it at the Music Box Theater here in Chicago, which is the greatest movie theater on earth. And I stayed for the entire duration of the film. I will say, though, that, you bought a ticket, you supported the project, and then you had a profound experience with the work. So, even though that didn't happen in the theater, it's, all of the intended, I think, points were achieved.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, so definitely, I 100% agree you made the right choice. Was the sound in the theater just like...
It was so quiet. There was no low end whatsoever. And I mean, we're listening to we're listening to an electronic album.
Yeah.
It's like this like lush, because I've heard a couple of the songs already. They pre-released a few of them.
Yeah.
So I knew what to expect, sonically.
Mm-hmm.
And like within minutes, I was just like, what the fuck?
That sucks.
Yeah, and so I gave it like another 10 or 15 minutes, and I was like, I can't do this. I was like, it's gonna ruin the experience. Like, it's gonna ruin the experience of hearing this record for the first time for me. So, and this goes back to what I've said in previous shows, where it's just like the music should always come first in any of these things. I don't give a fuck if it's a concert, if it's a movie theater, whatever. Like, the music needs to come first when it comes to this stuff. Yeah. And so, I don't blame the movie theater per se.
Sure.
I think like it's a weird thing. Somebody just talked about this. Was it Danny McBride? For some reason, I want to say it was Danny McBride. I could be wrong about that, but he was talking about how like state of the art movie theaters are in major cities, but movie theaters in smaller town, like, you know, in regular towns and smaller cities and stuff have kind of like been forgotten about in a lot of ways. Now,
Yeah.
granted, I was at the like indie theater that's like the art house cinema. Like, I might go back there next week to go see Killer Clowns from Outer Space if I have time.
Nice.
But it's not the place to go hear this experimental, you know, audio-visual project.
Right.
It should have been in a more state-of-the-art theater
Mhm.
where the audio side of things could really, you know, spread its wings.
Yeah.
So you know, it's just poor circumstances. You know, it is what it is.
Yeah. The theater that I saw at the Music Box is 95 years old. So it is acoustically, you know, famously not the greatest room in the world.
Yeah.
However, they just recently did like a big renovation and I think did some extra like sound treatments and stuff like that. And they updated their whole audio system a few years back as well.
Nice.
So it actually was like, I was kind of, you know, suspicious of walking in. It was the only place showing it and it's where I'd want to go see it anyway. But I was like, I mean, yeah, exactly as you were saying, you know, for something that's so music forward, music first should be. Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was the right theater for it. In some ways, it was like comically the worst theater for it based on like previous experiences I've had there. But yeah, with the recent renovations they've done and the updated sound system, it's like a night and day difference between like now and how it used to be in there. So it was actually it was fantastic sonically.
Love it.
It was cool too. The unfortunately not very well attended. I mean, our show was a Friday at 5 p.m. So, you know, kind of not like the greatest time in the world. People are just getting off work or going to dinner or whatever. But, you know, this is a 750 seat theater. And there were probably like, I don't know, maybe like 40 people in there.
Yeah. I mean, the theater isn't even, maybe it's half that size, but there was probably 60 people. 60 and 400 seats, maybe. I don't know. Okay. But yeah, similar scenario. Yeah.
But in a way, it was kind of, I think, an improvement because without like all those bodies in the room to kind of like soak up the sound, so to speak.
Yeah.
It really like it just traveled. It felt like it was so free to like, you know, bounce around the room and like, you know, just kind of get like under you and above you and come back at you from behind, you know, and all this type of stuff. So yeah, it was really, really cool. I enjoyed the music immensely. The music was like sensational. The visual stuff, I'll say, was for me a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
It's essentially, so basically it's like, you know, there's whatever, like 12 tracks on the album, and there's essentially just like a music video for each track.
Yeah. They're not like there was no through line or anything like that.
No, definitely not. I did notice that the arrangement of the tracks in the Tall Tales film is different from how they're arranged on the album, which was
interesting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like now that I've listened to the album, and I didn't realize that when I was watching it at the time, so I couldn't, you know, exactly tell you every single one. But I'd be, curious to look at that again and consider why they might have done that. But yeah, anyway, it was a really cool experience. So the whole thing only runs like an hour. And what I do, you know, there have been a lot of other like visual albums that have been done, things like that. And also I just enjoy a lot of like experimental film, which sometimes functions like this. It's a lot of you know, shorts that are kind of put together or things that aren't necessarily related. And I always enjoy seeing stuff like this because I like, you know, it's like we say about the weather in Chicago. If you don't like it, wait 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because you get to see some really cool ideas come out, but like there's always something new coming along. And so even if you're like, this one kind of sucks, it's like, well, whatever. In 3 minutes, we'll be in a whole other world. And, you know, that's always exciting just to like kind of have that ride of like, what are we going to do next? Yeah. And getting that constant, you know, kind of rejuvenation of things. So, and there were several that I thought were like really excellent as well. So the ones that, you know, I thought were really well done were like truly great. And actually the very last one, the one that I sent you the video of, which now I'm realizing you didn't see in the theater.
Yeah, but I ended up seeing that. Like that one was in the visual of that one was interesting. The whole thing. So the first three that I saw was like the lighthouse.
I like the lighthouse quite a bit.
the lighthouse is really cool, just from like
Yeah.
the way that they blended in the things happening through the light cycling it around was a really cool
That was
idea.
cool. And all
It
the
was,
fun, like interesting, like relative motion stuff with like the lighthouse spinning, but then like the camera moving around it instead of the light moving. That stuff was always really, really fun.
The boat was, you're inside the boat, whatever. Like,
Yeah, that
I
was
like, okay.
probably one of my least favorites. Yeah.
And then obviously I there was the few that they had already released, which was like the wacky characters.
You had sent me that like 2 or 3 months ago, I feel like.
Yeah. Here's the thing when it comes to stuff like this, and this is a bigger overarching kind of theme of Radiohead. Creativity knows no bounds if you allow it. And so I don't know if they're taste makers or not. I don't know if they are the antithesis of taste. Sometimes they are. I just think that like the environment that they've created for themselves allows them to just plow forward however they see fit. And more often than not, that comes with a lot of greatness. And sometimes it's just like, all right, well, sure, whatever. I don't know what they were thinking there, but if they're into it, great.
Right.
But I think that there's a beauty, and this is not something that Radiohead always was great about, but they were, and I say Radiohead is the grander thing. Obviously Tom York is the driving force behind all of this. We could hone this into being a Tom York episode, but I think that would be doing a disservice to the other gentlemen. So moving forward, we are just going to be Radioheading our way through this episode. I think that's just the easiest way to keep the conversation moving. But I think like there's this ability that they have to be open to what is interesting to them and not like hide and like shy away from it because they are worried about what other people might think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like their greatest gift beyond anything that they've ever accomplished put aside every great piece of music, every great vision. I mean, they've been releasing profound visual things, music videos and other short films and everything, live concerts. Like visually, they're one of the most captivating bands of all time. But they do not concern themselves with what other people may or may not think about them. They truly, in my opinion, are free of those, like, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't even you know what I'm trying to say here, but like they travel through their careers and through their art with a greater freedom than probably anybody else does on the planet, in all reality. Because when you really break it down, Radiohead as a band has existed in like 4 decades now, and they basically reinvent themselves every other album. Visually, they've done some of the craziest shit. I mean, Tom York almost drowned in one of the music videos. They do cartoon stuff. They do this. They do short films. They work with Paul Thomas Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They work with great directors. They do cinema scores. They do side projects that are all over the place. I mean, in the last 4 years, Tom York has recorded 3 records with his new band, The Smile, which is him and Johnny Greenwood, and then this very jazz progressive drummer whose name is escaping me at the moment. But then he also did a score / soundtrack. It's a little bit of both for this Italian horror movie or suspense movie called Confidenza. And he just recorded this sonically mind-blowing electronic album with Mark Pritchard called Tall Tales. So 5 like like incredibly special works of art in a 4-year period, and they're all very different from each other. And I think if you just look at, even if you just look at recent time, and you take that and you're like, how the fuck does somebody do all of this?
Yeah.
One dude is behind all of these different disparate entities that are so incredibly different from each other.
No, it's an impressive output.
Yeah. And he's been doing that for most of his career.
Yeah.
There's so much to be said for like, this notion of, well, this is what people expect of me, so this is what I'm going to do. And Radiohead is basically the antithesis of that.
Right. Well, especially because they, from what I understand, so I'm not, like, I'm familiar with Radiohead, obviously, and I've like heard all their albums and everything, or I wouldn't even say all of them, probably like more like most of them.
Okay.
And some of the side stuff, and then again, being a movie guy through Johnny Greenwood's work with Paul Thomas Anderson, who Greenwood has scored several of his films. Tom York has scored, as you mentioned, a couple movies as well.
Yeah. And then Paul's actually directed some music videos for them as well, I believe.
That's right. I think so. Yeah, there was a what was it?
There was one. Well, there was Anima, was the short film that was a Tom York solo record. But then I also believe that he did 1 or 2 music videos for proper Radiohead releases. There's one from a moon-shaped pool where I think Tom's like in an elevator. I believe Paul directed that. And then there's another one where there's like a guy like he's either pretending to be dead on the street, and then everyone else starts laying down. I don't know. I could prepare for this episode for a year and still not have done enough preparation. So in my mind, it's almost better that I'm just coming into this on a whim.
Yeah.
As most of these episodes have been, where my excitement outweighs my specificity of thought and fact.
Sure. Well, it's all right. People can look it up if they want to know so bad.
Exactly. That's the thing. You're not coming here for information. You're coming here for fucking 2 dudes that like to talk about things that they like.
Yeah.
So, like if you want to find out more, by all means, Google it or Chat GPT it, and you could ask any of these entities, more information about what we're discussing.
And then
I told
50% chance you'll get a correct answer.
Yeah, I mean, in this sense, you should probably get more like 100%.
I would hope so.
There's not too much gray area.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen ChatGPT spit out some weird shit.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's worked pretty well for me for the most part, but I basically just ask it like,
if you ask it like straight up facts or like what's the score of the Cubs game or something, like it's great.
Yeah. Well, speaking of sports, real quick, let's go on a little tangent here. How about them Knicks? Am I not moving back to New York in the most perfect time? Are the New York Knicks about to go to the Eastern Conference Finals and hopefully spank somebody and actually make it to the fucking NBA Finals for the first time in 30 years or whatever it is? I don't even know.
Oh shit! It's been that long for them.
It's been a while.
I know nothing about basketball aside from the Michael Jordan era Bulls.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. So I'm pretty excited to. Christina and I always talked about this thing where it's like, because I've kind of fallen out of love with sports in the last few years, in the last 10 years specifically, since I moved to Atlanta, to be honest. A New Yorker who grew up on the Giants, and then I'm a big Sixers fan. I loved Allen Iverson. Philly's right down the street too, so it's the whole tri-state area sort of thing. But I could never bring myself to like, I wasn't about to be like, oh, I live in Atlanta, so now I'm a Falcons fan or whatever. And I'm surrounded by just like diehard lunatic sports fans who just, they just, I don't know. Like, and college football is such a big deal down here where like in the Northeast, college football doesn't exist. So like, I don't know, sports just kind of like withered away on the vine for me here. But there's an excitement in New York right now, and I can
Mm.
totally see myself falling back in love with basketball at the very least, and then we'll just kind of
Sure.
see where it goes from there. But
Nice.
but yeah, Christina was always like, "We're gonna take our kid to sports games." I was like, "I don't know, I don't really watch sports anymore." But
Yeah.
now that we're going to New York, yeah, we can go to the Garden anytime. Let's go.
Nice. Yeah. This kid's going to wrestling matches. That's it.
Well, that was the whole thing. I was like, "Yeah, we're gonna go to wrestling." She's like,
Yeah.
"That's not sports." I was like, "Well, whatever. It's the same idea." Like,
Sure. Yeah.
you could-
Exactly.
yeah. So anyway, with all that being said, all right.
Nice.
So
Go next then.
let me.
But yeah,
I want-
no. So like, you know, I was like familiar with the Bends when it came out, and it seemed like that kind of made a splash pretty much right away. So it seemed like they very well could have just been like, okay, cool, this works. This is what we do now. Let's do this forever and just keep making money. And the next really big moment that for me that I remember from Radiohead was Kid A.
So you just skipped right over OK Computer. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, I came upon OK Computer later. I'm trying to remember. There was a music video, I think a Radiohead music video that was on Beavis and Butthead.
It probably would have been Paranoid. Well, no, if it was the it probably would have been My Iron Lung, because that would have been like 95. I mean, then there was Creep, which was 93.
I think it was Creep. Yeah. And that's from the Bends, right?
No, that's from Pablo Honey.
Oh,
okay.
Shit. Okay.
So here, let me give
I
you.
totally forgot about that one. Yeah.
Let me give you a quick. I want to give you a quick, like, we'll give you a quick history lesson mixed with sort of like the whole impetus of, I think, what makes Radiohead so special.
Mhm.
And I think this will help. It'll clear things up for you, and then it hopefully will open some doors for you as well.
Perfect.
So Radiohead's first hit single was Creep. Tom York, Pablo Honey is by all means not a great record. There are some good songs on there, but they were a young band just trying to figure their shit out.
Yeah.
They were not part of the like machine, so to speak. They got lucky with a hit song that they ended up hating and being embarrassed by. So then fast forward to the Bends, which would be their follow-up. In the next single that they released, which I believe is My Iron Lung, or it may have been one of the other, there was two other songs I think that had sort of some radio play. They actually mocked Creep in that song. So like they were literally like, tongue
They're
in cheek.
writing their own diss tracks.
Yeah. But well, they were just like, listen, like we aren't that band. We're not going to just do that anymore, right? So they kind of established the terms of who they were from day one, essentially.
Wow. Okay.
We wrote a hit song. Fuck that hit song. We're moving on to the next, right? That was it. That was the message. So then fast forward another 2 more years and they release OK Computer, which ends up being what is widely regarded their like magnus opus. Now, mainstream accessibility versus true artistry are usually two different things. OK Computer encapsulates both probably better than anything other than like Pink Floyd, later Beatles. There are very few other examples that I can think of that do both as close to perfect as you can get, right?
Yeah.
So it was also something that almost like destroyed the band. And there's a documentary that came out during sort of that whole whirlwind period for them called Meeting People in the Aisle, or Meeting People is Easy, which is ironic because it was basically all about how isolated they became. So, but that album, the two lead singles would have been Karma Police and Paranoid Android, became just monster smash hits. They went from playing in front of, large theaters to just selling out arenas and stadiums almost overnight from that, and never looked back as far as that the successful side of things goes. But they were very much struggling with the success of it all, because they saw themselves as this, like, they're not a pop band. They're Radiohead. They're the weirdos who make crazy music. And so their follow-up to OK Computer was Kid A, which was like, cool, you guys really like that? Let's see if you like this.
Yeah.
And they got rid of the guitars for the most part and went to ambient electronic music, and like, and, so this journey, if you look at just like the first like decade of Radiohead, which is, really the nuts and bolts of it all, as it took them longer and longer to release records after Hail to the Thief, basically, which would be like the bookend of that first decade. That would have been 2004. So if you go down the line, it's Pablo Honey, The Bends, OK Computer, Kid A, Amnesiac, Hail to the Thief. Those first 6 records, 10 years, all pretty much progressively different from each other in one form or another.
Yeah.
But their attitude towards everything was like, just because you think we're this doesn't mean we're always going to be this. We are going to constantly evolve. And they, and so like their fan base, like their real fans, the people who are Radiohead fans, not people who like the song they heard on the radio. When you can condition your fan base to understand where you're coming from, you create a situation where you're not hindered by these like ridiculous expectations of like, oh, I miss the 95 era Radiohead. It's like, no, we're going to be, you're open to this exploration, this, as they age and mature, they, are into different things. And
yeah, it's just like I was saying about Tall Tales. It's like you like are actually excited to see what's coming next.
Yeah. And
hope that it's different,
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you like what you're seeing, sometimes you don't like it and you're like, okay, well, we'll see what they do next. It'll be different at least,
Yep.
But yeah, even when you love it and you're like, this is my new favorite Radiohead album, it's like, well, shit, where are they going to go after this? Like, I can't wait to see it.
Exactly. The journey becomes so much more interesting because you don't know what the fuck's going to happen next. It's always something different. And like, for me,
there's a wonderful quote. I believe it's a Bob Dylan quote, but I could be wrong about this.
Okay.
Maybe I brought it up already, but it's he said that an artist is always in the state of becoming.
Yes, you have said that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And it's just, I'll probably mention it a million more times because I love it.
It's a great quote that it like carries a lot of weight. Yeah.
It's cool to it's cool when you really see, I'll go as far as to say like, a true artist or artistry that actually exhibits it. It's almost the fact that it is so unpredictable makes it that much more credible in so many ways because it's so unpredictable and wild.
Well, they create a situation where it's so easy to like compare A to B in any like artistic endeavor, right? You're like, I'm going to compare the last thing you did to the next thing you do, right? With Radiohead, I feel like they figured out this way where like they broke that system. Like for me anyway, and I think for a lot of their fans, like there's so many people out there that just love Radiohead, for better or for worse, right? And maybe it's maybe there's this notion of like a cult of personality where it's like you just buy into it because you're into the entity sort of thing. But I think with them, they're so genuinely just true to themselves that it defies sort of the like subversive sort of thoughts that come with that. Because for me, like I sit back and I listen to these things and it's like, walking out of a theater because I am deathly afraid of ruining that experience because I want to give it the respect that it deserves the first time that I hear it, and the next time and the time after that. But like that first time is so important, because like when you hear these things, you really want to like experience it. You don't want to just listen. Like you need to like feel it inside of your, rattling around inside of you. And like, they take so much care and effort into like the sound design that, if you're just listening to it on like the radio or like some shitty headphones or like on your computer speakers, then like you're just wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
You can get there eventually and just have it on in the background, but like those first few times, like you really should, like it should be like a intentional sort of experience, where nothing else is happening.
It's very it is very like tactile.
Yeah.
And like rich and layered, and there's so much going on at like every level of the whole dynamic range, like a lot of the times too, where it's like it utilizes the whole space of its sonic environment,
density.
Like,
there's a density to it.
You can like you really feel like something three-dimensional is happening. It's not just like there's some left and right movement, it just everything, even the sounds themselves, not just the way they're placed and mixed, but like they have these different kind of characteristics to them that really give them a sense of like space and distance and all this type of stuff that's like really impressive. I mean, again, I was lucky enough to see it in a theater that really, I mean, it was great in there too. Like it was really
I'm glad you had
vibrating through me.
As somebody who's not like a huge fan, to like get to experience that it's way more important that you got that experience than I did. Like it really is, when I think about it. Like, because I sit in either my car, I either sit in my car or I sit in my studio, and I crank that shit up to 11, and I can close my eyes and I can fucking create my own visual fucking experience, and everything's cool.
It's cool. And I just like, and as even though I said like, the visual stuff was kind of a mixed bag, which is like, of course it is, it's probably always going to be with an approach like that. But like, man, the like respect and reverence they're showing for their own work by giving it this treatment is also just really cool. It's like they really obviously are proud as hell of what they made here and want to present it in the most like I don't know, spectacular way possible. And to not only make, we're going to make a video for every song is one thing, but then like we're going to do a like 2-day run in theaters, so people can actually see it in that kind of environment. Is like that's awesome. I love that there's artists that like Tom have the capability to do something this abstract and still get it that kind of attention and release. But that they're actually taking advantage of those things and pushing that forward is really just amazing.
So that's another piece to this puzzle that I think never gets enough credit. Visually speaking, Radiohead and Tom and Co have always been pushing the boundaries. And so something that's not really known outside of like the Radiohead nerddom crowd is that like they have a co-collaborator on the visual side, Stanley Donwood, who has worked on basically every Radiohead album since I don't know if he was part of, I think his first stuff might have been on the Bends. He may have done some stuff for Pablo Honey, I'm not 100% sure, but guess who works directly with him on everything visual that accompanies every album? Tom York. So Stanley and Tom actually paint a lot of these things. A lot of the stuff that goes into the album artwork are actually collaborations between Stanley and Tom. And so Tom will paint, and then Stanley will paint, and they'll actually do shit. And they, and for like OK Computer, they had like a bunch of crazy like vintage and state of the art tech, and they were experimenting with like processing sort of analog digital combinations of things. So like if you go back and look at like the OK Computer artwork and like some of the other stuff that would accompany it like down the road, they did like a special edition a few years ago that contained a lot more of the artwork that they had been working on that didn't make like the final cut. But they always took a lot of care and effort into like the visual side of what was being released with the music.
Yeah.
You know, and it kind of goes back to like a foregone era of like, you know, whether it's a record or whether it's a CD or whatever, but like how important the artwork was to kind of establish a connection to what you were about to listen to. And that was one of the things that, like, when I was a kid, like, you know, my first memories of like album art are obviously Pink Floyd, but then Guns N' Roses, like Guns N' Roses, like those Use Your Illusion
Yeah.
and Appetite for Destruction are some of the most iconic record covers of all time. and you know, like Nirvana did a good job of it, but I think like when I go back to like the mid 90s and I think about like the music landscape of what was accessible versus what was attainable, there's a big gap, right? And you think about like when you think about like progressive rock and psychedelic rock of the 60s and 70s, and then you go into like the MTV age and radio age that really kind of took over in the 80s and 90s. What was popular was most certainly simplified. I don't want to call it dumbed down, but we got to the dumbed down place a little later. But things got simplified, right? And Radiohead kind of bucked that trend. You know, when grunge was King of the Mountain, you know, it was very like structurally simplistic music. There was a lot going on, but it wasn't hyper like dynamic.
Yeah, it was more about the overall energy and fuck you-ness of it. Yeah,
it was all energy. Yeah, it was all energy. And Radiohead was the antithesis of all of that. And they kind of like woke something up in me that I didn't realize was missing, because at that time I was listening to Nirvana, Soundgarden, and hip hop, you know? And so it was like a little bit of grunge and a little bit of hip hop. And like, and then Radiohead like kind of reminded me of like my roots, because like my dad was a huge Pink Floyd and Beatles fan. And, you know, I love that music, but I had kind of forgotten about it in my teen years. And then when Radiohead came out, it was like, holy shit, there's something that like kind of reminds me of those guys, but is so incredibly different. And like, this is like my version of that. And so, you know, when you take the music videos, you take the music, you take the artwork, you put all those things together, and you have this next generation version of Pink Floyd, essentially, you know, on their own terms. But like, that was what Pink Floyd, you know, Pink Floyd was a greater than entity as well. You know, whether it was Live at Pompeii, whether it was The Wall, whether it was the Wish You Were Here album artwork, whether it was, you know, whatever, like they were doing more than just putting records out. They were creating an entire artistic, you know, presentation that was a total package. And Radiohead very much like took that ball and ran with it, and they still do to this day.
Formed vision, you know, in general. There's like I remember there's like a mystery about it almost when you're like looking at that artwork, and it just inspires these like, who are these people? Like what what is it, you know, like what people say now about Pretty Light stuff, like, but what does it mean, you know? And,
yeah, exactly.
You know, that was the original
version,
like, you know, album artwork could do that, you know, and back in those days when that was something that was like really given the appropriate level of respect and care, you know, to do something really interesting with, and people paid attention, you know. Now it's a thumbnail, you know. But it's cool that you mentioned that, because somehow I never really thought about it exactly like that, but that's definitely how I became interested in Radiohead, was because, you know, so growing up, I guess, I was like, are we getting distortions?
You're breaking up again.
Oh no. God damn it, what the fuck? What did you think the issue was? You said you thought you knew what caused it.
Okay. We're going to leave this recording because I want to acknowledge the fact that our audio quality has sucked for the last few weeks. And we've been trying to figure it out. we made it longer than we've ever had, so that's a good sign.
Yeah,
but
before it goes
still,
to shit.
normally it happens within like the first 15 or 20 minutes. So I thought that, so I upgraded all of my show computers to Windows 11 finally, because they were all running on Windows 10. And when I did that, it fucked up the Wi-Fi driver on one of the computers.
Oh.
The other, like the computer that I had been using. So I had to like basically disable the Wi-Fi driver card or whatever and reinstall it. And it seemed to be working better from a Wi-Fi standpoint, because I noticed last week when we were talking, I had only had like half service. And so once I did that, but I've actually got a wired hardline into my computer. So let's pause and restart, because we've gone for almost an hour anyway. So we can start to sum this up, and if we can get 10 more minutes of clean audio, I think we'll be okay.
Cool. Right. I'll just hang up and rejoin.
So we're back. We've got audio things cleaned up. We're gonna try to plow through the rest of this episode, and we're going to dive deeper into fixing our audio problems.
Yep.
Orion, continue.
Thank you. So yeah, the visual end of things that you mentioned, that being such a big part of their identity that often doesn't get as much credit as it should. So yeah, because they really came onto my radar through the visual side more than anything, honestly. Yeah. Because this is MTV era, watching music videos a lot and all that type of stuff. But I was, as you were, sort of into the grunge era type of stuff, and then I got like super into death metal and heavy metal for a while, and that was when I grew my hair out and shit, started playing guitar. Glory days. But and then from there moved into like Fish, classic rock, and like rave music. So yeah, try to guess when I started doing drugs. But so Radiohead never really Radiohead never really like penetrated any one of those like predominant music interests, but like I was always aware of them because their music videos would always come up on MTV. And it was one of those bands that, like, at the outset when I'd hear that, songs were like a little slower, more melancholic, things like that, I was like, this isn't really my thing. But usually the video was so fucking weird and different and interesting that I was like, I would end up watching it, and then it would be one of those that like any other, if there was anything even comparable to Radiohead, if there was anything like in that world of music or genres, generally I was changing the channel or turning something else on. But like when their stuff came on, it was always like I kept it on, like multiple times throughout, my life. And I think Paranoid Android that has an animated video, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that one I remember specifically was like really kind of a holy shit. Like I just don't think I'd ever seen really like an animated music video before at all. And so that approach and what they did with it and everything was like super interesting. So yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. It's not something, even though that's really kind of was my relationship with them, was from the visual side. I never really thought about that before, but yeah, they always did really have incredibly interesting stuff going on that was like wildly compelling.
Yeah. I mean, I could drone on and on and on and on about the greatness of Radiohead for every reason possible.
Yeah.
There's this one thing. So, we've been using quotes as of late to help us
sure.
kind of, drive our thought process. Cause I'm a scatterbrained crazy person. You have your shit together a little bit more than I do, but I found this quote that I thought this quote was incredibly interesting, and it speaks to, I think, one of the great messages that kind of is injected into everything that Radiohead does. So, and you use the word melancholy, which is perfect for this. It's because a lot of their music is kind of dark and sad and depressing, but there is a hopefulness to most of it, actually, if you really sort of allow yourself to get lost in it all. But But this quote hit me in a very, very special, meaningful way. You're in trouble when people stop listening to sad music, because the moment they stop listening to sad music, they don't want to know anymore. They're turning themselves off. And I think that notion really is like the embodiment of why Radiohead is so special to me, because they are a band. They are an artistic, like mega force of nature that is always trying and wanting to know and do more. And I find myself in a very similar kind of state of mind more often than not. And so, like, if everything's happy and easy, there's no effort being made. You can relish in joy. That's great. But like this notion of like, I don't know, like exploring the hard stuff generally is where like new things come from, right? When you confront the dark stuff, that's like, I've always talked about, like, I've learned more in the 8 really evil psychedelic trips that I've been on than I've learned in the 500 happy trips that I've been on. So, take that for what it's worth, whether I'm just a fucking pathological lunatic or if I am like tuned into something where it's like, all right, knowledge comes from confrontation, or discovery comes from confrontation, or whatever, however you want to like kind of perceive that. I think Radiohead embodies this notion that like we are going to present the hard stuff. We're going to challenge our audience. We're going to present and provide so much like creative, bulk, whether it's the weird shit, whether it's the cool shit, whether it's the new shit, whether it's this, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But there's always something new to behold. And, why it has to be anchored down in sorrow and darkness, that's up to, that's up to everybody. But I find it, I find it to be the most fruitful thing. And I think like there's a lot to that quote beyond just, creativity and artistry. I think, people try to numb themselves from the the tough stuff constantly, whether it's through chemicals or through ignorance or whatever the case may be. I could I'm probably going on a tangent here, but like,
no, that's a great quote though. I love that.
I think the point that I'm trying to make is that like they came to me at like the perfect time, where this kid who was just kind of happily lapping up the things that were just handed to him, and then like, oh, this band exists that defies all of the things that I thought were cool. Why do I love this so much? Okay. There's more to all of this than meets the eye. You don't have to just enjoy the things that everyone else around you enjoys. Enjoy whatever makes you feel something, and enjoyment and happiness aren't always the same thing. So like, if you enjoy dark fucking goth music or metal or this, then enjoy it. If you enjoy complex, out of the box, weird shit, enjoy it. And like, it can also be pretty, and it can be simple, and it can be hard, and it can be challenging, and it can be all of those things. And it's just like, instead of worrying about what everyone else thinks, just give in to, how you feel about it. Now, well, my friends said that this is the cool thing, so this is what I'm going to listen to, even though I think it's stupid.
That. Tell them it's stupid.
Fuck all of that. Yeah.
So is that how Radiohead changed everything for you?
Yeah, basically. They presented this whole new artistic world, but beyond that, they they awakened this thing in me that was like, I don't care if this is cool or not. This is the thing that is fucking really special to me. And that's when things really, kind of came together, and then Fish came after that. And like, because Radiohead came to me before Fish did, in all reality. I discovered Radiohead actually from the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack. Gotcha. Talk show host, and the other song that I'm drawing a blank on.
Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet. Yeah,
that's right. It's a incredibly tortured movie. But I love it. I think it's great. But that, like, talk show host, there was something about like that, like, I want to, or whatever. I'm not going to start singing. I'm a terrible singer. But I think that the first line is, I want to be something not like me, or something like that. And I was like, oh shit, like, well, that's interesting. And that show very much talks about kind of like that whole notion of like, I'm not content with the stuff that's put in front of me. There's got to be more out there. And they opened that door for me. And then that's when, like, my, like, it was like, if you look at like the progression of music that I like started to really like seek out, right? I went from, when I was a kid, right, I was listening to Pink Floyd and Guns N' Roses, right? So I was off to a good start. and then it was the grunge stuff, right? But I was too young to really appreciate grunge for what it stood for, right? Like, when I was 10, 12 years old, listening to Nirvana, I just, like, the energy was awesome, but like, I didn't really understand what was behind all of it, right? And then I fell into the world of hip hop, and like, yeah, right. Well, I mean, I was close, but I wasn't quite there yet, And then I fell into the world of hip hop, mostly because, well, one, I was the poor kid who lived in a trailer park, and like, I could relate to these like stories from the ghetto of New York or whatever. It was relatable, maybe not one-to-one, but like, I was like, okay, these guys are speaking my language. Like, they're talking about being poor and like having to do shit that they don't want to do because of their circumstance. And then also, like, I was really big into basketball, so like, basketball and hip hop just go hand in hand. And then as I became, it was movies that really like opened up the world of music for me. That's how I discovered Elliott Smith. That's how I discovered Radiohead. That's how I discovered Bell and Sebastian. Through Good Will Hunting, Romeo and Juliet, and High Fidelity. Those are like a break, like that little bubble of time right there. 96, 97 ish, I think, is when all those movies came out. And those singular songs, like, it was like someone fucking smacking me over the head with a sledgehammer. It was like, yo, there's some really cool shit out there, but you got to go find it. Like, this is just a little taste. I didn't know who any of these artists were, and there wasn't Shazam in 1997.
You had to hunt that shit down. Yeah.
And so like, I would like wait until the movie was over, watch the credits, and then you would have to try to figure out what song you had heard to figure out who the artist was. And so even at that point, I was still kind of confused. And then I would save up money, and then eventually I got those soundtracks. And then eventually I figured out, oh, that's the shit. Then it was, so it was like this old like Easter egg hunt of discovery. And so
the best part was sometimes in the credits, it would just say like the musicians' names. It wouldn't say the band either. So it would say like,
because it would just be like the writing credit.
Exactly. It was like performed by Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. And you're like, who the fuck are these guys?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but so this progression that I kind of went on, right? So that's how this idea of like seeking things out started. I discovered new music through cinema, and maybe this is the conversation that we can have next week. This is actually a perfect segue.
Yeah.
Is let's do the music and cinema
Oh yeah.
episode next week. So there's your little teaser for what we're going to do next week. You know, brain fart. Right. So this idea of like seeking out music, not being spoon-fed music, started with these movies and with these artists. And then I discovered Fish, and I discovered the idea of like live music. And then from there, the discovery kind of took a left turn because Fish infamously covers, you know, all sorts of different artists. So then it's like, oh, now I know who Ween is, and not and then I found out who Frank Zappa is. And that's really when everything changed. But Radiohead was pre.
They were there first.
Frank Zappa. Yeah, Radiohead was there first, so they get all the credit. But Frank Zappa was the one that really fucking blew me wide open. And
I was going to say, how is that not on our list? We've definitely got to do a Frank Zappa episode sometimes.
Yeah, there'll be a Frank Zappa.
Yeah, because he changed. I mean, he changed everything. I'm sure for a lot of people, but he changed everything for me too, like 1,000%. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Radiohead is to this day, you know, it's Radiohead and Fish, 1A, 1B, and for different reasons. You know, Radiohead puts on, and we never even talked about their live performances. I mean, those guys have been cutting edge on the live front, both production wise, sound wise, performance wise, for most of their career.
I've never seen them.
If you had, oh my God, well, if this little comeback is true. For real, then maybe we'll have to make that a reality. Because I mean, it's, you know, it's the greatest live show that isn't Fish, and it's the greatest live show because they're the opposite of Fish. You know, like they're not up there fucking, you know, changing it up every night, but they just bring a special thing to how they perform live. And it's like, you know, I've said this 1,000 times on different interviews and things like that, like, my technique as a lighting designer, if you had to boil it down to two major influences, it was Andy Watson from Radiohead and Chris Carrotto from Fish. And I basically took those two very, very different artistic approaches and smashed them together and laid the foundation for where I would kind of take my lighting journey. And, you know, that both, and the same could be said for music, and the same could be said for visual, just whatever, non-sensory. You know, Stanley's paintings have a huge influence on my painting style, even though they don't look anything similar. There's a lot of things that you could point at and say, oh yeah, Greg got that from Mr. Downwood, you know. And so like they've been one of the biggest influences on me personally, professionally, artistically.
Ever. Outside of
you know,
that's cool. Outside of music, outside of lighting, even.
Yep. So, you know, so thank you to Mr. York, Mr. Donwood, Andy, Nigel, Johnny, Phil, and the Greenwood brothers, and Ed. Can't forget
about Ed. I've been saying it for years.
I'm drawing a blank on his last name, but Ed was actually, you know, what's funny here's a little fun little, we'll tie this bow. We'll tie this bow up. So, oh God damn it. What's his last name? It doesn't matter. So when Radiohead, you know, they haven't taken like an official hiatus, but they take their breaks and then they go and they do their individual things. And so, Ed started a band and actually went to a couple of Fish shows because he wanted to explore the idea of improvising more on stage. And so who better to learn from and who better to observe than Fish? And so there actually was this little crossover moment, and it happened right around the pandemic. And I think it might have been like the New Year's shows in 2019. Ed was backstage, and then like he had done a run of shows maybe in like February of 2020, and he was actually kind of like testing the waters of these like kind of not, you know, not so like out there Fish jams, but more of the like kind of bouncy funk based, like groove based funk, like jam style that Fish is known for. And I don't know if he ever picked that back up after the pandemic or not. But there was like this weird short little period of time where like the worlds of Radiohead and Fish were starting to like intersect. And it was like a really interesting prospect.
Wow. Yeah, what a strange thing. I mean, because there were always rumors at Fish shows too about like guest musicians that might come out or, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
That, yeah, if they were really tied in with Radiohead at the time, that would have resulted in some. You would have been at every show on the tour just to be like, he might come out. Ed's going to come out.
See, you know what's funny about that? I wouldn't. I am anti-guest at Fish shows.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, it's always the worst part of the show.
And it's not even that it's the worst part of the show necessarily. It's just not Fish anymore.
Yeah.
Fish is those four guys. You can't replace anyone and you can't add anyone. It just isn't.
Yeah, it's just different. Yeah. Like immediately, even if they're playing, even if they're just like doubling Trey's guitar, you know, like during the main portion of the song, you're like, something's wrong here.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, the best sit-in that I got lucky enough. We'll wrap up with this little side thought here. I saw when Bob Weir sat in with Fish in Nashville at the Ascent Amphitheater, and it was after Trey had already done Fare Thee Well. So there was this whole thing about Trey not singing enough at Fare Thee Well, the Grateful Dead 50th anniversary shows, where Trey basically filled the Jerry role. And, you know, there was famously these Let Trey Sing shirts. And, you know, there's other stories that kind of go with that and so on. So I don't know if it was the following, it might have been 2016 because Fare Thee Well was in 2015, but it was either 2016 or 2017. I want to say it was 16. Bobby sits in for basically the entire second set. And as a sort of acknowledgement of all of that, Trey sang the Grateful Dead songs and Bobby sang the Fish song. And it was cool. I mean, it was the coolest sit-in that I had ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them now. I'm whatever my next Fish show is my 200th Fish show.
Holy shit!
I'm sitting at 190. Yeah, I'm sitting at 199. So I've seen a lot of sit-ins, and you know, like I said, it's not Fish anymore. The second someone else steps on that stage, it's not Fish anymore. It's a rock band doing whatever they're doing. But that was certainly the best iteration of that.
Sure. Yeah, they at least made it into something.
You know? Yeah. And it was, you know, it was really special in its own right. But at the end of the day, like, I just want to see those four guys. I don't even care if they're playing like shit. Right. I'd rather see those four guys play like shit than have anyone else step foot on that stage. That's just my feeling on that. So and
I'd rather have Oxy Trey than Bob Weir the whole show.
Sadly, yes. And with that, thank you, Ed O'Brien. I remember your last name.
Oh wow, what a perfect conclusion. That's beautiful. Ed O'Brien. There you go.
Oh my God. And that has been the Stroke of Midnight. Thank you.